Hello and welcome to the Fisher Leadership Initiative podcast. I'm Jen Shanahan, and I am here today with Parag Shah. Parag is the Chief Ethics Officer at Nationwide, and he is generously taking some time to chat with us today. Hello, Parag.
Hey, Jen. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Well, let's just dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit about what all entails Chief Ethics Officer at Nationwide and how you got here?
Absolutely. So I'll start a little bit further back. So, born and raised in Toronto, Canada. Been here in Central Ohio, since middle school. We moved here back in the 80s. Came here to The Ohio State University for my undergraduate studies. I actually started in pre-med before I jumped around a little bit. Eventually landed myself in the honors accounting program here at Ohio State. So went through Max Fisher back in the day. In fact, where we are situated right now having this conversation was the hall in which I had many of my classes. So brings back some fond memories for sure. So the honors accounting program really, I think, was what really triggered me to think about my professional career in many different ways, including the fact that we thought a lot more about critical thinking, analytical thinking, maybe realized that I wasn't ready to get in the real world. And I really enjoyed that part of the honors program. So I decided to go to law school. So I went from Ohio State over to University of Illinois, where I pursued my law degree. I actually did 2 years there and then visited Ohio State for my third year. So I was right down the street for my third year of law school. Eventually, I started practicing here in Columbus in private practice, all corporate, general corporate work, mergers and acquisitions. I like to say that since starting my professional career, I've had six different jobs with two employers. So I was in private practice for about 4.5 years before I left there to come into Nationwide. I've been now with Nationwide for over 20 years. I've had various roles since I've joined Nationwide, all within, I'll say, the legal and compliance organization. So I won't bore you with all the different types of opportunities along the way, but eventually, my path led me to this current role as a chief ethics officer. I've been in this role now for 7 years. Part of this was really thinking about my personal and professional growth. How could I give back in the organization in a way that felt like I was doing the right thing? I had some great experiences back in law school thinking about that type of work as well, working for the U.S. Attorney's Office. So when this opportunity opened up, I certainly pursued it, and I've been in this role now for 7 years. So many may not be familiar with what is a chief ethics officer? What do they do? I would overly simplify it as, my role and responsibility is really to think about how do we help promote and protect our company's strong ethical culture. And there's a lot of different threads to that we can talk about if we'd like, but really in a nutshell, that's what my office's role is. So we have an Office of Ethics, which is what I lead. And our team, helps support our helpline. Many organizations will call it a hotline. So we have anonymity features where associates can contact our office if they want to. They have a question or concern around the code of conduct, which is what we administer. And we also have internal investigators. So if someone alleges fraud or some wrongdoing, my office will look into those concerns as well.
Wow. Yes. So when we think about ethical leadership, how would you define that? And also, how would you say it's possible to integrate it into the culture in a corporate environment?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And so, one thing that stands out to me when I think about that, at Nationwide, one of our company's core values is around acting with honesty, integrity, trust, and respect. And for me, I think it really serves as a strong anchor for how I think about ethical culture within an organization, regardless of the size of it. It could be a large organization like Nationwide. It could be a relatively smaller organization as well. But to me, it's really a nice anchor to think about ethical culture. And so, however an organization decides to define ethics or ethical culture, I think ethical leadership is really about creating an environment where ethical behavior becomes the norm. So I think it begs the question then, so how do you really then enact that, or how do you really get there? And so for me, I really think about it in layers. And the first layer would be, it really starts with setting clear expectations, communicating those expectations, training against those expectations, and then ultimately enforcing those. So at Nationwide, I mentioned earlier, we have a code of conduct that really helps set those expectations for the organization for all of we refer to them as associates rather than employees. But it doesn't have all the answers, but it certainly provides some guardrails around the do's and don'ts in terms of ethical behavior within the organization. We also required annual training for our associates as well. And then we have organizational procedures in place that allow for us to make sure that those ethical expectations are enforced.
Wonderful.
But that to me is layer one. And then to me, really, when we think about integrating, I think your question was around how do you integrate it into the organization? I think it really requires a strong tone from the top. Not just your most senior leaders, but also your frontline. I'll refer to them as frontline leaders. To me, ultimately, it's about the shadow that all the leaders cast within an organization. And so that requires a lot from them. And certainly at Nationwide is no different, but any organization, that's where we think about accountability, transparency, fostering that culture of wanting to do the right thing. But to me, ultimately, kind of this last layer, as I think about the question, it really, ultimate integration, I think, is when your frontline employees or associates view themselves as ethical leaders. And that may sound strange, but I view everyone within our organization as ethical leaders, even our frontline employees or associates. When they start to hold themselves accountable, when they start to hold their peers accountable, frankly, when they start to hold their leaders accountable as well, to me, that's when you have really full integration within an organization about the ethical culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can imagine that a lot of that really does stem from the training that you provide, creating that foundation and that sense of personal responsibility. Thank you for that. So you were part of a conference here recently with the Fisher Leadership Initiative. Thank you so much for that. You contributed to a panel on courage and responsibility. And so I'm curious, how does a leader champion ethical practices within a large organization, especially when there are complex dilemmas? And inherently, it seems courage plays a role in that. How do we navigate this?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I agree with you. Courage does play a big part of it. And I kind of go back to the concept of a shadow of a leader. And I think about championing ethical practices involves leading by example. And making those tough decisions, and really prioritizing, integrity over convenience. And the way I think about it, I like this. There's a lot of different ways of talking about ethics, and to me, what resonates is really choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. And so it's not easy. I want to fully acknowledge that. Here as part of this conversation, it's not easy to make those tough choices, but really leading by example is a great starting point. But then, I think it also begs the question, so how do I go about doing that as a leader? Whether you're a frontline leader or a senior leader within an organization, especially when you have, complex dilemmas to deal with. And I think, the guidance that my office will provide to others within Nationwide, but I think generally it can apply to others as well, is first thing is to slow down and to gather advice, gather different perspectives. To the extent you can share without breaking any confidentiality obligations you may have, talk to others, whether it's your peer, certainly your leaders within the organization. It may be someone outside, of the organization. Again, be careful about confidentiality, but, have those types of moments where you can pause and think through a tough decision to the extent you can. There may be moments where your pause may be only a matter of seconds or minutes, but to the extent you're able to take a little bit longer, allow yourself that opportunity. In addition to that, what we encourage, and we put this actually in our code of conduct, is for yourself when you're making those difficult decisions, ask yourself some things. Have I checked all my biases in making that decision? Is the decision I'm about to make not only legal, but also consistent with my company's policies and value statements? This may sound a little overly simplistic, but would I be proud to tell my family and friends about the decision I'm going to make? Would I be comfortable if the decision I made was to make the news in some way, make the headlines in some way? When you're taking those actions and decisions, it's not only asking whether I can do that, whatever that thing is, but ask yourself, should I? Is this something that I should be doing? And that's kind of going to that next level of thinking through a dilemma.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot in there, and I think a few things that really resonate are, just having that situational awareness by gathering feedback, because it is very easy to get kind of stuck in our own way of seeing the world. So I really appreciate that.
And I'll add, Jen, if I could,
Yeah.
like, that's why an office like mine exists, frankly, is to be a resource for whether it's our frontline employees or our most senior leaders as well. Be that independent thought, to bounce something off of our office, to think it through with our office, to allow for us to support, others. So again, promoting and protecting our company's ethical culture, this is part of that resource that we are within the organization.
Fantastic. Wow, thank you. So in your experience, what are the most effective strategies for fostering an environment where accountability and responsibility are paramount and ethical discussions are open and encouraged?
Yeah, so I think about foundationally, again, back to an earlier comment, it's setting those clear expectations, documenting them, and make sure you communicate them and train on those. And also establishing, some, safe channels for asking questions, reporting concerns, just like we have within Nationwide. We have an Office of Ethics. We have other resources as well for our associates, where you can feel comfortable and confident to be able to speak up, come forward, and have those kind of difficult, raise those kind of difficult concerns or questions.
Yeah.
But I think the most effective way, frankly, from my perspective, is really engaging the frontline leaders. So I distinguish that from the most senior leaders of the organization. They are tantamount and paramount in terms of the importance of a tone from the top. But it's really those frontline leaders and having them create an environment of accountability and responsibility. So what does that really kind of look like? From my perspective, it's them having or creating an environment where they can have open dialogue with their teams. Having conversations around principal leadership, around ethical leadership. Sharing their journey, sharing some difficult moments that they may have in the way.
Yeah.
What I think that does is it creates an environment where others then feel like, all right, I'm not alone in this. My leader has struggled from time to time, whether it's a personal struggle, a professional one, but they are just as human as I am.
Yes.
And if they're being vulnerable, they're able to share some of the challenges that they've had. They'll feel comfortable then, being open to me coming to them to have some similar kind of conversation, or for me to challenge them on a difficult decision that we have to make together as we move forward. Again, an office like mine is there as a resource. So at Nationwide, we provide those types of resources to our frontline leaders. We have toolkits around how to have these kind of conversations. We will create presentations. We will speak. We kind of make these virtual roadshows nowadays in this environment, sometimes in person as well, where we have these conversations where we can help facilitate some dialogue to talk about ethical dilemmas. What are those scenarios? What could those look like within our organization? And how do you navigate through those? So that's, to me, kind of how I would answer that question that you posed.
Yeah, that's really great, because then the leader feels as though they already have that practice. Absolutely. Doing it when they go into the real world, scenarios. Emotion can so easily take over, and that training must help so much.
Absolutely. And by the way, that's where I think back to the earlier point about pausing when you have those difficult moments or dilemmas. It's really kind of removing yourself from the emotional decision that you're about to make and being a bit more objective about it.
Yes.
So when you give yourself that pause, whether it's a moment, whether it's a day, I think you start to realize, all right, now you have some more clarity around, is this the right decision based on all the objective factors I need to consider versus just the emotions of them.
Have you noticed any patterns in terms of folks going from a place where they're not in the habit of practicing that pause to finding that? Is there what helps the most? Is it these scenarios where we practice and we train and we understand different ways to respond? I'm just curious, like if somebody's kind of feeling like they're not very naturally good at this.
Yeah. So certainly, the training that we provide, to our associates affords those types of opportunities to think through scenarios. So when we have training, we do provide some scenarios for them to think through in the moment. It's creating, it's creating some repetition, or that muscle, if you will, in terms of how to create, those moments where you can pause and think through, should I select option A, B, C, or D? To keep it overly simplified in the moment. But outside of that, I think going back to the earlier comment, it's hopefully your frontline leaders engaging in some level of dialogue or opportunity. And I'm not, naive to think that this should be the sole focus of a leader's conversations with their team all day, every day. They have a business to run. They have a lot to do. But if you can take some time, maybe it's once a quarter, maybe it's at least once a year, if you can have this type of conversation where you can create a scenario, you can think through, all right, what will we do? What should we do? Team, here we have this situation. I have this situation, and whether it's a real life one that you've navigated through, or creating one where we can help, my office can help a frontline leader think through some scenarios to mock up as well. I think that can build some good habits as you move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you. So how do you ensure that a strong corporate culture grounded in integrity can adapt to change? We have rapidly changing business landscapes, and I'm just curious, how do we come back to those core values as we navigate this?
Yeah. So actually, I was thinking about this as we were coming into this podcast together, and we were talking about AI.
Yes.
To me, in the moment, there's a lot of change taking place societally within organizations. Nationwide is no different in terms of how to think about AI, how to adopt into AI. And so I think I start with whether it's AI today, whether it's, if we look back historically, for me, when the internet became a thing, and, or you fast forward to when, smartphones became a thing, or mobile apps became a thing, as an organization, how do you leverage those technology advances? Change is constant. And so I think first and foremost, it's having that growth mindset, that curiosity and continuous learning. I think if you, develop that skill, I think it can help you navigate through these changing landscapes in many different ways. And curiosity it's a word that keeps coming back to me when I think about that. Your willingness to say, all right, how do I move forward? How do I lean into change? How do I lean into whether it's new technology or otherwise? I think having that continuous learning and growth mindset is important. Kind of related to that, agility and adaptability. I think it goes hand in hand with that continuous learning and willingness to say, all right, I was doing something a certain way yesterday. Is there a different way of doing it today or maybe tomorrow as I learn about, what tools and resources I have available to me and how do I move forward? So I think, being agile, being adaptable is an important thing to really be successful for yourself, but also for your organization to be able to move forward as well. But all this is not possible without strong leadership commitment and helping an organization work through change. And we were talking about this a little bit earlier as well, and kind of change management is important, and that strong leadership and the willingness to say, all right, yes, we need to make changes, but we're not going to leave you to figure it out on your own. We're going to help you move through this journey together. I think those are all important components of how to move forward.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So I'm curious what advice you would offer to current and aspiring leaders who aim to build or strengthen the framework, the ethical framework within their own teams and organizations.
And I guess I should have started by saying this just as a caveat. These are the views of my own, those of Nationwide.
Yes.
But to me, first of all, I commend anyone who's thinking about how to really, strengthen their the ethical framework within their organization. I think that's a great place to start, is actually having that desire to do so. What I would say is start small. Lead by example and prioritize ethics in everyday decision making. Show your team, if you're a leader with folks that report up to you, what it means to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. Back to earlier comments we were having, set clear expectations. Whether it's like Nationwide, we have a code of conduct, but it doesn't have to be that formal. Within a smaller organization or a different organization, create some guiding ethical principles, even, or something else that's that can be documented as here are our expectations. So start small. I think the point is to create something that aligns with your company's core values that are centered around doing the right thing. And then back to the point of, let's communicate those. If your associates or others around you don't know what those expectations are, then how do they know to adhere to them? So to me, it's setting those clear expectations, and then back to the training. And then also, I think it's creating a framework where we celebrate people speaking up. We celebrate people coming forward, because it's not easy. I know firsthand, given the role I have at Nationwide, and as people come forward, it can create some anxiety. So, let's create an environment where it's safe to come forward, but also celebrate people, even ultimately if the outcome is different than what they may have expected even. I think that's okay. It's okay for folks to feel comfortable, at least to come forward, allow for the organization an opportunity to really think through, what should be done with those difficult situations.
Yeah, that's really fantastic, because I think so many times it can be difficult to come forward fearing some kind of repercussions. And
Absolutely.
so there's that culture of celebrating, admitting mistakes, as well as, just bringing forward truths that we're unsure about and things that bother us.
I would add,
Yeah.
at least at Nationwide, the way I like to communicate, our office's support is it's not just about creating a speak up culture as we refer to it, but also if you're not sure, just ask.
Yeah.
I think there's power in just asking a question and affording someone the opportunity to really help you through it, versus thinking the answer
Yeah.
and then making a decision that may end up, ultimately being the wrong decision, or a decision that, where you may have ended up cutting corners or not complying with company policies. And now we have a different environment in which we have to navigate, which can be even more difficult. So if in doubt, just ask. That's kind of what I would like to encourage, not just, folks at Nationwide, but others within your own organization. Hopefully you feel empowered to just ask a question and allow for others to help you navigate through wherever that situation is.
Yes, absolutely. And that does get easier with practice.
I agree, absolutely.
So many of our listeners are also students or recent grads, and I'm just curious, do you have any advice for them as they start to embark on their leadership journeys? They're just getting going in the world.
Yeah, so what I would say is, regardless of the size of the organization or the complexity of our organization, and regardless of where they start, I think all of us can be ethical leaders, principal leaders. It doesn't require someone to have a role like mine. It doesn't require someone to be a senior leader, the CEO or the CFO of an organization. I think each of us, the minute we step into an organization, I think we have, that opportunity, I'll call it, to really embrace being a principal leader or an ethical leader in our own way. And I would suggest it doesn't have to be these, monumental decisions. It could be very small, in those micro moments where we make a choice to be, conscious and intentional about that choice we're making, to think about the values of our own values as well as the values of the organization. Are they aligned? And how do I make those decisions? How do I make those choices in those moments? To me, that's being an ethical leader or a principal leader. And I think that's where I'd encourage, all the students, hopefully listening to this podcast, to think about that for themselves, that you should feel empowered to be an ethical or principal leader from day one.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And a quick follow-up, just if you have any advice here for students who are, still kind of trying to find their way. Is there any advice you have just for kind of strengthening that internal core?
I do. So, gosh, I would say, really think about kind of, what defines you in terms of your character, and what kind of reputation do you want to uphold, or you want others to view you through. I think those two things, the first one certainly is in many ways innate, but I think you can build your character, it's your traits.
Yes.
And each of us has our own various traits, but think about what's important to you. And there's a lot of things that we talked about today, I think, can contribute to your character.
Yeah.
But then think about your reputation and how can you build a positive reputation by making decisions that reinforce to others how they will view you. Because ultimately, I think all of this that we think about
Yeah.
helps build trust, and helps build trust in terms of how you work with others, how others view you. So, in terms of what to do, I think it's taking those small micro moments, and it doesn't have to be only at work. I think that's another thing I'd encourage our audience. Think about even those opportunities in your own, I call it the village. We all have our own village, our personal village.
Yes.
And even in that personal village, whether it's within your family, within your community, think about the decisions that you can make. Find those opportunities where you can make some principled decisions, ethical decisions to help your village move forward. I think that's a place where you can practice those skills, hone in on those skills, and hopefully you can carry those forward into your organization as well.
Is there anything that I haven't asked that you'd like to share with our audience?
I think the only other thing I'd encourage your students to think about is, about as they're embark on this professional journey of their own, is, think about what their definition of success is.
Yes.
Each of us has our own definition. Allow it to grow, allow it to be nurtured, and to evolve in different ways. It can change, a few years from now. But think about what your definition of success looks like at different stages of your professional career, and then be intentional about how to pursue it. And that can come in many different shapes and forms in terms of how to be intentional about it. But I would say, try to define what success looks like to you, and then be intentional about how you pursue it.
Thank you so much, Parag.
Oh,
This
my
has
pleasure.
been a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.